In this episode of the Busy Mind podcast, you'll learn simple, actionable steps you can take to start recovering from chronic stress and burnout as soon as today. We'll talk all about your nervous system and your stress response and something called completing the stress response cycle. And that's what you need to do to start to recover. And we'll talk about all about how to do that, the ins and outs, and everything you need to know so that you can get started right away. And I kind of think of this as emergency care for your nervous system when you're in the throes of chronic stress and burnout, and all about how to take great care of your nervous system so that it can then take great care of you. Welcome to the Busy Mind podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Wheeler, and I'm a former public school teacher and professional development trainer of mindfulness and emotional intelligence, turned coach and course creator of mindfulness-based stress and burnout relief. But it wasn't all that long ago that I was deep in a state of overwhelm, chronic stress, and totally burnout. And then fast forward past so much of that suffering and lessons that I learned to the mostly calm, resilient, joyful state of being that I have today. One that used to only exist as a wish and a daydream, and one where I get to share the priceless insights from my rewarding journey of healing and growth, knowing I've helped countless others break free from their own suffering to find their own place of peace, regain control, and take their life to the next level. I created the Busy Mind podcast to give you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies to help you on your own personal journey from stress to strength. If you're looking for relief from overwhelm, stress, or burnout, are on a journey of healing and growth, or want to maximize your potential in a sustainable way, you're in the right place, and I'm so glad you're here. And so the title of this episode is The Fastest Way to Recover from Chronic Stress and Burnout. And so that's what we're going to get into today. And I kind of think of it as triage for the nervous system or emergency care for your nervous system, especially when you're experiencing chronic stress and burnout. So I'm so excited to share these steps with you, these simple steps that you can take and start to feel better and start to feel recovered as soon as today or as soon as you're able to implement them. We'll talk about stress and how there's good stress and bad stress. We'll talk about the nervous system and completing the stress response cycle and exactly how to do that. And I'll share 10 example strategies, things that you can start to do today or tomorrow. And we'll talk about stress versus stressors and how that plays a role in chronic stress and burnout. We'll talk about different types of stressors, external versus internal, and things that are outside of your control and versus within your control. And looking at those as next steps once you first start caring for your nervous system so that it can take good care of you, and then you can start to deal with those stressors. And I'll share resources for more support. I created a guide to go with this episode. It has a summary of the key topics that we'll talk about today. It has a checklist of the 10 strategies, and it also includes a habit tracker if that's something that would be helpful to you for starting to implement this, and something that I recommend. So you can find that guide at melissamwheeler.com/recoverfast. And just want you to know that that's there so that you don't have to worry about remembering everything, because it'll be a lot of information. So you have that PDF, that guide there for you as a resource. And then I'll talk more about it later in the episode, but I also created a meditation to go with this episode, a 12-minute meditation available to you for free to stream or download. And that's at melissamwheeler.com/meditations. And I've also put links for these in the show notes. And then I'll share just some personal examples and little stories to go along with our topics. And one last thing before we get to the good stuff, please keep in mind that this podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes. It's not intended to substitute for professional medical advice or diagnosis or treatment, so make sure to consult with your medical professional before making changes to things like your diet, your exercise routine, your medical regimen, your lifestyle, or your mental health care. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a clinician. I am here as a teacher, a coach, an advisor, and as a friend. Okay, so let's start out by talking a little more about these terms: overwhelm, chronic stress, and burnout. I like to think of them as a progression or three different levels of stress. That's kind of what makes sense to me. So I'll talk about that. And I also want to mention about stress and something called eustress or good stress, eustress, EUSTRESS. So oftentimes we just think of stress as the bad type of stress, the stress that doesn't feel good, and the stress that causes problems. But I also want to mention that there's good stress or eustress, that this is the kind of stress that pushes us to do well. And if you've ever had a competition or a performance or an event that you had to prepare for, that good stress played a role in that. And it's what pushed you to rise above and be able to be successful in your competition or this event, whatever it was for you. And we need both of them. They're both really important. So there is such a thing as good stress. If we didn't have any stress at all in life, it would be pretty boring. And our systems are actually meant and designed and developed to handle stress really well. But our systems get out of whack, and that's what we'll be talking about later on today. And then these terms: overwhelm, chronic stress, and burnout. So I think of overwhelm as sort of like level 1, when the negative or the difficult stress starts to come in. And when you feel overwhelmed, you start to feel out of control. You start to question your ability to handle things. It starts to affect your life negatively. It's not chronic or long-term yet, and you can still see a way out. And then chronic stress, I think of this as level 2, and it's similar to overwhelm, but now it's long-term. It's having undeniable negative effects on your day-to-day life, and it's getting more difficult to see a way out. And then burnout, or level 3, kind of the last stage of negative stress or stress that's difficult to deal with. And the stress and overwhelm have become so bad, and it's been going on for so long, that you're now feeling emotionally exhausted. You just don't care anymore about the people or things you used to care so much about, and you feel like nothing you do makes any difference. So that's burnout. So just to define those terms and kind of how I think of them, and maybe that's helpful for you, and maybe you're identifying with one of those levels. And so I may use those terms interchangeably, and you can feel free to think about things in terms of whatever situation you're in for our conversation today. Whichever one you're experiencing, the strategies that you'll hear about today will be helpful. And then even if you haven't gotten into overwhelm or chronic stress yet, the strategies that I'm going to share today will still be helpful. They're helpful for everyone and anyone, and you could actually use them to prevent getting into these states. Okay, so before we talk about the specific strategies and the exact steps to take, it's important to have a good understanding of how your nervous system works. So let's talk about that. So your nervous system is also called the autonomic nervous system, and it controls involuntary bodily functions. So it controls things like your heart rate and your breathing rate, pupil dilation, your stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, your stomach activity, and so many more things. So things that you don't think about to make them happen, they happen automatically. And then your autonomic nervous system, or we could just call it your nervous system, it has two branches, or kind of two sides, or two main big functions. The first one is the sympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for the stress response, or what's commonly called fight or flight. And you don't have to remember the big terms or the big terminology, but just getting a general idea of how things work. So you might even just think of this one as fight or flight. Then there's the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for the relaxed response. When you recover from the stress response or fight or flight, and you get into a state of rest and digest. So the two branches of the nervous system, fight or flight, and rest and digest. And so for fight or flight, your stress response, when the sympathetic nervous system kicks in and turns on, things start to happen. Your stress response starts to happen. Your heart rate goes up, your breathing rate increases, maybe you start sweating, maybe you notice that your neck or your shoulders or other areas of your body get tense, your stomach gets upset. This is all happening because there's a rush of neurochemicals and hormones that are released, things like adrenaline and cortisol. And so they trigger this state of fight or flight. Also, the amygdala, the emotional response center of the brain, which is deep inside the brain, also known as the reptilian brain, that gets turned on and activated, and it starts to hijack the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is a part of your brain that's closer to your forehead. It's responsible for higher level thinking, cognitive function. And so what happens is the amygdala gets activated and it hijacks the prefrontal cortex, and then you're not able to access your higher level thinking and your cognitive function as well. And so you're not able to think and function as well as you could if you weren't in a state of fight or flight, if you weren't having this stress response. Then the other side of the nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, that helps us get into a state of calm and relaxation, and we can call it rest and digest. It helps us recover from that stress response. It helps to slow the heart rate down, bring the breathing rate down, let the body relax. The stomach becomes unknotted, and that's because then those stress hormones have a chance to retreat. The amygdala calms down, and now the prefrontal cortex can come back online. We can think clearly and be more effective at whatever task it is that we're working on. Then there's freeze. So oftentimes we hear it said fight, flight, or freeze, but freeze is a little different. So freeze is a stress response that's activated by the parasympathetic nervous system. So if you recall, fight and flight is activated by the sympathetic nervous system. Rest and digest is activated by the parasympathetic nervous system. But with the state of freeze, it's activated by the parasympathetic nervous system. And this is when you completely shut down or collapse. You're in a state of freeze. And your body and your nervous system decided that whatever stressor you've encountered is just too much. It's decided that you will not be able to overcome this challenge, this stressor, by fighting or by fleeing. So it's decided to save your life, to attempt to save your life by activating the freeze response. So that's just a really, really brief and simplified overview of how the nervous system works and how the stress response works. And this system is a beautiful system. It's inherent in each of us. It works beautifully. It was designed perfectly to work extremely well in the ideal world. It helps protect us. It helps to save our lives. It kicks in when there's a real threat, and we need it, and we can be so grateful for it. And out in the wild or back in the Paleolithic or hunter-gatherer caveman days, the threat was a bear or a saber-toothed tiger or an invading tribe. And this system would give us the energy and the ability that we needed to save our own lives, to run and get away as fast as possible. That would be flight, right? If we flee, or to fight, to stay and battle it out. And so beautiful system works really well in those situations. And then today, in the modern world, it kicks in to save our lives in other ways. Maybe it helps us to react quickly and slam on the brakes to avoid a car accident. Or maybe grabbing the rail on a staircase so that when we slip, so that we don't fall down the stairs and break our necks. Or grabbing a loved one just in time to save them from something oncoming. So in the ideal world, the stressful event would be isolated, and our nervous systems would have time to fully recover, to rest and digest. Fight or flight would kick in, the event would happen, and then our nervous system would have time and the right situation to get into rest and digest. We'd recover and we'd go on with our day. And so when that happens, we can call it completing the stress response cycle. So it's a beautiful system, and it works extremely well in the ideal situation. The problem comes in when the stress response system, the nervous system, gets activated over and over and over throughout the day after day, and for days on end. And for many of us, this is exactly what's happening. Likely, if you are experiencing overwhelm, chronic stress, and burnout, then this is what's happening for you. And even if you're not, this has just kind of become a normal part of day-to-day life, and it's just how life is set up. And it doesn't mean that it's something to really, really worry about. It's just the way that society runs. But what is important is to learn how to mitigate that and how to take good care of it, which we'll talk about in a moment. But it gets activated day to day from things like running late for a meeting or catching all the red lights on the way to an important appointment, or maybe even a rude comment from a coworker, someone coughing or sneezing nearby. All kinds of things that activate our stress response throughout the day, just as normal parts of the day. Maybe someone has a bad day and takes it out on us, or worse things. It might be bigger, more challenging things, like hearing about layoffs that are coming up, or having a really, really unreasonable workload where more and more work just keeps getting piled on all the time and there isn't time to catch up or to recover, or we don't have the support that we need at work or at home or with dealing with challenges that are going on. And then that creates a situation where we are repeatedly experiencing the stress response. We're repeatedly getting into fight and flight over and over again, and we don't have time to recover. The nervous system doesn't have time to activate the parasympathetic nervous system to get us into rest and digest, to get us into a calm, relaxed state, and to recover from that stress response. The complete stress response cycle doesn't happen. And when it happens over the long term, days and days on end, weeks and weeks, months and months, and years even, it becomes harder and harder to recover. The parasympathetic nervous system can't do its job, and we get into states of overwhelm, chronic stress, and burnout. And the more stressed we are, and the more this goes on, the more activated our sympathetic nervous system is, the more sensitive it becomes, and the more likely it is to become even more easily triggered. And so then we stay in this highly activated state, and it becomes this vicious cycle that gets really difficult to get out of. And then if you add to that, this is really interesting. If you've had a history or a childhood that had a lot of stress or trauma in it, then that's going to make your nervous system more highly sensitive at all. So if you've noticed that you're more sensitive to stress than others, and if this is true for you with your childhood, then this might be why. So really, really interesting. And if you're interested in hearing more about this, I'm going to talk about this in the next episode. So I hope you'll tune in to that. So when this constant activation of the stress response system happens, when it goes on long term, it has detrimental effects. It takes its toll over time. It even shortens our lifespan. It affects our health in really real negative ways. Stress lives in the body, and it just starts to affect all of our systems. And according to the Mayo Clinic, the APA, the American Psychological Association, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, and these types of sources, they talk about the clear link between chronic stress and poor health, including a shortened lifespan, early death. So it is slowly killing us. This isn't hyperbole, it's not hype. And so I want to share some of the medical information that's available out there. And I'll link my sources in the show notes as well. But so chronic stress affects every bodily system. There are 11 systems. These are your musculoskeletal system, your respiratory system, your cardiovascular system, your endocrine system, gastrointestinal, nervous, immune, and reproductive systems. So it affects all of our systems and puts us at higher risk for so many health problems. I'm not going to list them all here, but I'll share some examples. And my guess is that you're experiencing at least one or two or a few of these. Almost everyone I know, when I think about my friends and family, has experienced these on a frequent level or is experiencing these. So chronic stress can put us at higher risk for problems like muscle tension and pain and headaches, heart disease, heart attack, high blood pressure, stroke, digestive problems, things like indigestion, acid reflux, IBS, and worse. Also weight gain, obesity, type 2 diabetes, arthritis. It adds to sleep problems like insomnia, nightmares, sleepiness, even narcolepsy. Puts us at higher risk for addiction, both substance abuse and behavioral addictions like gambling and shopping. It puts us at higher risk for cognitive problems, so problems with the brain and problems with memory and focus, and also mood problems. It makes it difficult to regulate the mood and can put us at higher risk for mood disorders like anxiety, depression, and even suicide. And it affects the way the immune system functions. and makes it function less optimally so that we get sick easier or more often. And our tissues can't repair, and then we suffer with chronic illness and injuries. So, probably you're experiencing already at least one or two or a couple of these. And I share these not to be a downer, but just to give us an idea of just the real risks that are involved if we don't get a control of and a handle on the chronic stress. So, if feeling better and breaking free from being in overwhelm or burnout isn't enough of a motivating factor to get you going, then maybe the pain of these kinds of things and the pain or the possibility of these coming on or getting worse might add to the motivation needed to start to take some next steps, some real concrete next steps, which is what we're going to talk about next. So let's talk about exactly what to do and how to feel better, how to take good care of the nervous system so that we get out of this vicious cycle, our systems can recover, and we start to feel better. And if you are having those symptoms can start to retreat and you can start to feel better and start to get relief. And so the way to do that is to intentionally and regularly complete your stress response cycle. I'm really excited to share about this. And for this idea, I'm summarizing some information from a New York Times best-selling book called Burnout. And it was written by two sisters who are also researchers. And their names are Emily Nagoski, who has a PhD, and Amelia Nagoski, who has a DMA, a doctorate in musical arts. And their work is based heavily on research, and there's a chapter in the book all about completing the stress response cycle, and they recommend doing it at least once every 24 hours or daily or once a day as an important first step of burnout recovery. It's a fantastic book. Check it out if it's of any interest to you, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes. So let's talk about all the ways that you can intentionally help your body complete your stress response cycle. And so that means you're going to do things that will help your nervous system move from the stress response of fight or flight to the calm, relaxed response of rest and digest. And so how do you do it? So a real brief way to summarize it is you're going to do things that make you feel better. Some of the most effective evidence-based ways that the Nagoski sisters have found are these. So I'll list them out, and then just a little later I'll talk about each one more in depth. But here's a list of several things that you can do. So physical activity, slow, deep breathing, positive social interaction, laughter, affection, crying, creative expression, progressive muscle relaxation, and then meditation. And they recommend doing one of these at least once a day. And this list isn't exhaustive, it's not complete. These are just some of them. These are the ones that the Nagoski sisters share in Burnout, but they also mention that there's so many ways. There's many, many ways to complete the stress response cycle. There were too many to list in the book, but these are just some of the ones that they included. But it could be anything that makes you feel better while also supporting your nervous system. So healthy things that you can do, healthy activities that you can do that make you feel better. Things that you would do if there were no stressors present, right? So if you didn't have an immediate stressor present, you might do some physical activity. You would be able to take some time for some slow, deep breathing. You would find reasons and ways and time to laugh. So these kinds of things. So I wonder what others you can think of. What are some things that make you feel better, that are healthy and that support your nervous system? For me, personally, I know that spending time in nature helps me feel better. And also, they mention meditation, that's a big one for me. And then mindful movement is a big one for me, and that can be a form of meditation as well. And they also note that strategies that involve the body will be the most effective. And that's because the stress response is physiological. It's a body response. It's something that's happening in your body. So stress we think of maybe as a feeling, an emotion, and a state of being that we get into, but it's really happening in the body, right? We talked about the nervous system. So Things and strategies that get the body involved, not just the mind and not just the emotions, really work best. They make a point of sharing that in the book. And then, how do you know if you've been successful? How do you know that if you do one of these, that you've completed the stress response cycle, that you've moved out of fight or flight and into rest and digest? So you'll know that you've been successful with it once you start to feel better. And you might not feel 100% better, but even just incrementally better, even just a little bit better, either in your body or your thoughts or your mood, that is a signal to you that you've completed the stress response cycle. And then if you keep at it, you'll notice that you'll feel better and better over time. You might think about, in figuring out how long it'll take for you to feel better, or maybe giving these a try and wondering why it's not completely working or totally working yet. You might think about how long the state of chronic stress that you've been in has been going on, and that might have something to do with it and to come into play. And you do need to do this at least once a day or once every 24 hours. This gives your nervous system a break. It gives it time to return to homeostasis so things can return to a normal state of calm, so that those chemicals, those hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, can retreat and can go back to where they belong and back to their homes instead of being constantly pumped out, and which is one of the things that causes those detrimental health effects. They also recommend choosing a variety of strategies. So maybe you'll pick one of these that'll be your go-to, but it's important to have some backups just in case your go-to isn't available that day. So choose a variety of strategies. And in the book, Emily and Amelia share about how this used to happen naturally and as part of tribal life back in the tribal days, the hunter-gatherer days. So you might be out hunting or gathering, and you encounter a lion or a bear or a saber-toothed tiger, and your nervous system would activate so that you can save your life by either staying and fighting the animal or fleeing and running away. And then once the ordeal was over and it was safe, you would walk back to the village, you would tell the tribe all about the ordeal, and everyone would celebrate your safe return. And so in that example, there's 3 ways that the stress response cycle was completed. The walk back after the incident is a form of physical activity, and that regulates the nervous system, gets you back into rest and digest. Then you take time to share with everyone what happened. So that's an example of positive social interaction, which is one of the strategies that completes the stress response cycle. And then you celebrate with everyone. So another example of positive social interaction. So that's how it used to work. And then, unfortunately, like we talked about earlier, life just isn't set up this way anymore for most of us. So we need to intentionally set things up so that we can complete that cycle. And doing it at least once a day is going to be ideal. And if that's something that's just not accessible to you, I totally get it. I totally understand. You probably have a really, really busy schedule and a really full plate. So if once a day isn't accessible, just start where you are. Just maybe try it once, and then next week see if you can get it in twice on 2 different days and go from there. Just start where you are and keep taking action. And then just another reminder about the guide that I created to go with this episode so that you have a visual, you have everything written down in one place. And I list out those 10 strategies. There's a checklist in that guide, and then again, along with key points and key ideas from this conversation, as well as a habit tracker for this. And you can grab that for free at melissamwheeler.com/recoverfast. Okay, so I want to share just a little bit more in depth about each of the strategies and how to do them and how to get started. Physical activity is the first one, and according to their research, physical activity is the single most effective strategy. And this can be any form of movement. So it doesn't have to be what you might traditionally think of as a workout or as exercise. Those things are great. They will work as well, but it's any form of movement. So it could be dancing in your kitchen, or walking, running, cycling, swimming, strength training, your favorite class at the gym or on YouTube, rock climbing, yoga, whatever it is that gets your body moving and gets you breathing harder and moving faster. You'll know that you've done enough once you start to feel better. Or you could go with a basic recommendation to do 20 to 60 minutes a day. And if that's too much, if you're just getting started, if bringing physical activity into your life is new for you and it's something that you did want to start to use or use as your strategy, maybe just start with a few minutes a day or start with 10 minutes a day. Just start where you are and build from there. And I wanted to share too about bipedal forward movement or bipedal forward motion. So these are things that get your feet moving in a bipedal motion. So things like walking, running, cycling, swimming. These kinds of things would qualify here for physical activity, but they're also really, really especially good for anxiety and mental health. So just a side note that I wanted to add in, that if those things are going on for you, just another push for physical activity and bipedal motion. Then there's slow, deep breathing. So this one can be done in any way that works for you. You just focus on slowing and deepening your breath. And you don't have to worry about doing it right or wrong. Just giving it a try in whatever way it makes sense to you can work just fine. But the Nagoski sisters share a specific example of how to do this. And so I want to share that with you for if you're someone that wants something a little more prescriptive. One exercise they recommend is to breathe in to a slow count of 5, hold that breath for 5, then exhale for a slow count of 10, and then to pause for another count of 5. And they say that if you do that 3 times, it takes just 1 minute and 15 seconds, and to give it a try and see how you feel. And this one was new to me, and I gave it a try, and I really, really liked it. So that's just one example of a way that you can practice slow, deep breathing. I'll give you a couple of others in case you're interested. Again, you don't have to do these specific exercises. You can just take time to breathe slowly and deeply. But one of my personal favorites is belly breathing, which is also known as diaphragm breathing or diaphragmatic breathing. And with this one, the belly expands and gets bigger on the inhale, and then it relaxes and falls in on the exhale. So it's just as simple as that, bringing movement to the belly when you breathe. Another one of my favorites is a form of rhythmic breathing. So there's lots of ways to do rhythmic breathing, but one that's really good for bringing down the stress response is where the exhales are twice as long as the inhales. So for example, maybe you breathe into the count of 2 or 3 or 4, and then you would breathe out twice as long to a count of 4 or 6 or 8. So that's one way to do rhythmic breathing. And I want to mention too that if there are any challenges for you with slow, deep breathing, there's many possible reasons, but if it's too overwhelming, just let it go and try something else. And you can always come back to it later and try again. Or if it's not too overwhelming, just keep practicing and see if it gets easier. But the good news is that there's lots of strategies that you can try for you for completing your stress response cycle. I'll add a little bit more about how the slow, deep breathing works. So when we're in a stressed state, we naturally breathe faster and more shallow. When we're in a state of calm, we naturally breathe more slowly and more deeply. So the way we feel affects the way we breathe. And vice versa, we can actually reverse engineer our systems by changing the way we breathe. So we can intentionally breathe slowly and deeply to feel more calm. So the way we feel affects the way we breathe. We can change our breathing to affect the way we feel. And this signals to the nervous system that it's time for calm, it's time for rest and digest. It lets your nervous system know that everything's okay now. And actually, it's how all of those strategies work. The physical activity, the positive social interaction, and the rest of them that I'm going to continue talking about. When we do them, we signal to the nervous system that now it's okay, it's time to calm down, it's time to get into rest and digest. And the last thing about this one, the slow, deep breathing, I want to share that depending on how you do it, it could also qualify as meditation. So if you do some slow, deep breathing and you do it mindfully and with awareness, where you're closely focusing on the sensations in your body as you breathe in and as you breathe out, and then you notice when you get distracted and then you refocus, this is a way to make it a meditation. So you could make this a 2-for-1, where you're kind of getting two strategies in one practice. And if you're interested, I created a 12-minute slow deep breathing meditation audio for you, and you can check it out. You can stream it or download it. It's at melissamwheeler.com/meditations. Another strategy for completing your stress response cycle is positive social interaction. And so this one is really anything where you're interacting with other people. And it doesn't have to be significant. So it doesn't have to be, a night out at dinner or a long phone call catching up with a friend. Those things are great, and you should absolutely do those or keep doing those if those work for you. But it could be as simple as conversations in passing about things that are insignificant, conversations about things like the weather or the big game last night or whatever friendly banter is going on. What this does is it signals to our nervous system that it's okay to be calm and that there's no imminent threat. Since when there are threats, we don't have time for these kinds of positive social interaction. This one is just so interesting to me. I loved learning about this one. It really helped me to rethink my stance on these conversations in passing that I used to think were kind of pointless. These things like exchanging pleasantries with strangers, or I've heard them called hallway conversations or water cooler conversations, and hellos between neighbors, talking about the weather, or even giving compliments like that beautiful sweater that someone's wearing. And if you're like me, if you're like how I used to be, you're often trying to avoid these types of conversations because you just don't have time. And back when I was deep in a state of overwhelm and experiencing my state of burnout, I used to avoid these types of conversations and interactions at all costs. I just didn't have time. I would rush as fast as I could to the bathroom or the copy machine or the mailroom, making sure it was clear to everyone that I was in a rush and I didn't have time to say hello and that I really just wanted them to stay out of my way. I had too much to do and not enough time, and socializing just was not an option. But now, and after having read about this strategy in burnout, I have a totally different take on this and a totally different perspective. So now I welcome and I even look for these kind of interactions, since I know that this few moments, this little interaction, connecting with another human, is actually going to support me and help my nervous system bring my stress levels down and help my health, my short-term and long-term health, and just help me feel better. So this one is just so interesting to me, this idea of these quick positive social interactions. And then also I acknowledge too that this one can be a bit of an art. If you are really busy, you just genuinely don't have time for a lot of this. So it can be an art to keep these interactions short and sweet, and having ways to exit these invitations for longer conversations in a graceful way, especially if you encounter those energy vampire types and so on. So just acknowledging this one can be a bit of an art, but if you can get it, it really is a great way to help support your nervous system, and it doesn't take a lot of time. And then another strategy is laughter. The Nagoski sisters write about belly laughs together with others that we have relationships with. But I really bet that it could be any kind of real, authentic laughter that could work. And this one's a little more tricky, right? Because it's harder to plan. It's harder to intentionally implement it into your day. Laughter is something that usually happens more spontaneously. So maybe doing a little brainstorm and thinking about how can you bring more laughter into your day. Maybe even holding an intention that you're going to laugh more today and taking time. Maybe it happens with some of those positive social interactions. So just giving yourself just a little bit of freedom and a little bit of space to allow this to come into your experience a little more. For me, I like to save videos and clips that I see online to a folder that's called Just for Laughs. And I keep a list of my favorite comedians to search for, and I watch out for whatever their latest specials might be on Netflix and those kinds of streaming services. And then I've also tried laughter yoga, not intentionally, but I've been at a couple of workshops and conferences where there were laughter yoga sessions that they had us all go through. And I had been curious about it, and I found it to be pretty cool, even if it was a little bit weird. So it was really interesting. It actually doesn't involve any yoga movements at all, any asanas or yoga poses. It's just the teacher or the teachers laughing. And then laughter is contagious, so everyone starts laughing. And then it just builds from there. So if you have any interest in that at all, that could be another idea. And then there's affection. So there's many things that can be considered affection, and I'll talk about those. It doesn't have to just be with a partner or something like that. But to quote Burnout, they say that we may need a deeper connection with a loving presence, and most often this comes from some loving, beloved person who likes, respects, and trusts you, and whom you like, respect, and trust. And so if you do have a partner or a friend or family members that you can share this type of affection with, that's great. Some research-based examples of types of affection that really work are the 6-second kiss, and that comes from relationship researchers John and Julie Gottman. So that's an interesting one. Another one is the research-based 20-second hug, as well as showing affection to a pet, a beloved pet. These things can all qualify as affection, but it doesn't have to be with another loving person if you don't have that available to you. It can be social connection. So it can be being part of a strong community like those found in spiritual or religious communities. And it can also just be a spiritual connection, feeling supported by a higher power or another invisible force, whatever your beliefs are. If it's a belief in God or the universe or life force, or it could even be having a strong sense of meaning in your life, having a strong connection to a sense of purpose, and these kinds of things would all work for affection. And then there's crying. So crying is another effective way to complete your stress response cycle. And in the book, they call it a big old cry. And this is where you just let it all out, allowing yourself to cry until you don't want to cry anymore and until you feel even just a little bit better. And if you've ever rewatched a favorite tearjerker type of movie and that same part gets you every time, that's an example of a movie that took you through the entire stress response cycle. So that's another way to do it. And then this one came up for me the other day. It was interesting. I was having a busy morning, and something that I had been working on, a stressful project, had just come to completion on my drive on my way to an appointment, a mammogram appointment, which I was not looking forward to, and I was actually feeling really, really stressed about. I was having a lot of anxiety about the appointment, and I went into the appointment. It went great. It went better than I ever could have expected. Everything was fine. I was worried about being just in pain and being really uncomfortable. The technician was lovely. I just couldn't have asked for a better experience. So wrapped up the appointment and then went out to my car, turned my car on, was ready to pull out and just get to the rest of my day. And tears started welling up and I started to cry. And my first instinct was to kind of push it away and get on my way. You know, I had other things to get to. It was important to get going. But then I remembered and I thought to myself, what's happening? Why am I crying? Like everything went so well. And I had a moment and I realized, oh my goodness, this is the stress response cycle completing. I just had several stressful things happening that just came to completion, and I had a moment to breathe. And so my nervous system took the time to complete the stress response cycle. So I took a few moments just to stay there and let it out and to cry, thinking that, oh gosh, this is going to take a while. But once I gave myself full permission and just let it happen, it really only took a total of 1 or 2 minutes. It was really, really quick. let it out, and then I felt so much better and I was able to get on with my day. So that was really interesting. And so we may not always be in a situation where, the tears start to come up and we have the time and the space to take to let it happen. But if you do have a few extra minutes and if you can let it happen, this is another effective way to complete your stress response cycle. Creative expression is another strategy that works. And so this can be any artistic medium, any artistic activity that allows you to express yourself outwardly. So any form, it could be painting or drawing or music or theater or writing or crafting or sculpting or storytelling or whatever else. And what's happening is, as you create, you're taking the time to focus on your thoughts and imagination. It doesn't even have to be intentional. And what you create naturally reflects your inner world. And again, it doesn't have to be intentional. It will naturally happen through the creative process and as you take time to create. I just think this one is so interesting. And you don't have to sit down with the intention to deal with the emotion. You don't have to sit down to do art to deal with your stress. Just making space for the art makes space for the emotion to come through. And you don't have to have consciously felt the emotion while creating either. It's almost like this works magically. Just taking the time for the creative expression helps you complete the stress response cycle. What's happening is it gives you space to allow big feelings to be present, a space to be with strong emotions that day-to-day life doesn't usually make space for. Then there's progressive muscle relaxation. So this technique is especially great for folks who aren't able to exercise or to do much physical activity. Exercise is an essential part of health and longevity. So if those are accessible to you, those are just such good and important things to do for your health. But if they aren't accessible to you, or if it's, a time of day or a situation where you're not able to do your physical activity, this is a really great one. It's a body-based therapy. And like we talked about earlier, the stress lives in the body. So strategies that involve the body are really, really effective. So in order to practice progressive muscle relaxation, it's best to do lying down. And what you do is you tense every part of your body, one area at a time, starting with your feet and finishing with your head, paying special attention maybe to areas where you hold your stress. And what you do is you squeeze each area as hard as you can for a slow count of 10. Then you let it go and relax. You could do it 1 or 2 times for each area and then move on to the next area. So for example, you might start by your feet. So you would squeeze or tense or flex your feet as hard as you can, counting to 10 slowly, and then you'd let them relax. And then you'd repeat it, or you'd go on to your calves or your whole leg area until you've completed your whole body. And then I like to finish by then squeezing my whole body, tensing my whole body for another count of 10, and then letting it go and noticing the difference. One way it works is that it helps you notice the difference between that tension, that feeling of tension, and then the feeling of being relaxed and being not tensed. This one can be great to do at night before bed or while you're in bed. You're doing it laying down, and so for bedtime, you're already laying down anyway. So that's progressive muscle relaxation. All right, and then another strategy, the last one that they share in Burnout is meditation. So they only briefly mention meditation in the book, and they highlight the profound impact it had on one of the author on Amelia's recovery from burnout. But I wanted to share more deeply about it here. It's been such a game changer for me, and it's made such an impact for so many of the folks that I've worked with over the years. So if this one speaks to you, I just highly encourage you to give it a try. Or if you've tried it before and it didn't work out and you are still interested, just to give it another shot. And if you're looking to get started or to get restarted, you could do a search and see what speaks for you, see what's available to you locally or virtually. And the best way to get started is really to take a class or to take a course. So something that has a sequential curriculum and that has guidance from a teacher, regular guidance. This works so much better than piecemealing together bits and pieces that you find online, that you find for free. You'll just be so much more successful this way. Many people give meditation a try just to give up when they run into common challenges. And there's so many challenges. Things like not having enough time, like not figuring out how to fit it into the busy day, or feeling like your mind is just too busy, or feeling like you're not good at it, you suck at it. There's so many challenges that are really common. And when you take a course and you have guidance, it'll guide you through those challenges. These challenges are normal. They're not unique to you. They've been around for thousands of years, and there are ways, really simple ways to navigate through them and get through them with some simplicity. And it can take practice to get it, but it goes so much further in supporting your stress and burnout recovery in the long run. Meditation, it is more of an involved strategy than the others that we've talked about so far, but the benefits are so worth it. Taking a course is the best way to do it, and in the work that I do, offering a 6-week course is my favorite thing to teach, my favorite thing to offer. I used to teach one for staff when I worked for the school district, and the transformations that I got to witness were profound, and it was just such an honor to be part of that. And I'll be offering one again soon, so stay tuned if that's something that you're interested in, or if you're interested in learning more from me, practicing meditation with me, stay tuned, and I'd love to connect with you there in that way. And I want to share too that there are so many different ways to practice meditation. There are literally thousands of different ways to meditate. So there's so many options out there. So if you tried a style or a form of meditation before and maybe that one didn't work for you, just be open and look for other forms. Try another style. Mindfulness meditation practices are specific ways to practice meditation. And these are the practices that have been researched the most here in the West and are a large part of what I teach. And so because they've been researched the most, we know about the research-based benefits of mindfulness meditation. So I want to include some of those here. There's so many benefits and so many reasons to get involved with meditation. And so those include regular meditation practice reduces chronic stress. It brings down cortisol levels. It brings down tension, pain, and inflammation. And this is all with regular practice, right? So not practicing here and there, a little bit here and there, but practicing regularly over time. Practicing regularly improves emotion regulation. It improves attention and focus, cognitive and executive function. It helps with sleep. It helps with cardiovascular system function, immune system function, and overall quality of life. It increases compassion for self and others, and oftentimes that can translate into kindness and being kind to ourselves and others. It's been found to be as effective as medication for anxiety and depression, but without the side effects. And people also commonly report reduction in medical visits, so less visits to the doctor, decreased use in prescription and non-prescription medications, and even increased job satisfaction. Plus, when you practice meditation regularly, it increases your awareness. It increases your level of consciousness, your ability to be mindful. And in order to make a full recovery from chronic stress and burnout, you first need to become as conscious as possible of all the factors participating in the burnout. All of your thoughts, all of your feelings, and all of your actions that are participating in the burnout. And this is true for any change you want to make. Any change you want to make in your life, in order to make the change, first you need to become 100% conscious of all of your thoughts, feelings, and actions that relate to that. When you practice meditation regularly, you support yourself in doing just that, in raising your level of consciousness around everything participating in that. And then this isn't to say that burnout is your fault, right? Most likely it's not your fault, but it's your responsibility because you're the only one that can decide what actions you'll take. No one else can do that for you. So it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility, and meditation can help you find a way through that. And so, if you want to dip your toe in or give it a try with my guidance, I mentioned before, I created a 12-minute slow, deep breathing meditation for you if you're interested. And again, you can stream or download it for free. You can find it at melissamwheeler.com/meditations. And it's a 12-minute meditation. We do a little warm up with mindful breathing. Then we practice some belly breathing, and then we combine it with rhythmic breathing. So again, it's a 2-for-1. You get 2 strategies in one, the slow, deep breathing combined with meditation, both really, really great ways to complete your stress response cycle. And then I wanted to mention mindful movement as well. This is another great way to practice meditation, especially if sitting still for extended periods isn't something that you're interested in or that you're able to do. And this is how I got my start in meditation. And if it wasn't for that, I probably never would have practiced because I just was not a person who could sit still for very long. I love to practice something called dynamic mindfulness, which is a signature form of mindful movement from Naroga Institute. It's my favorite form to practice these days, and I love teaching it as well. But you could really look at any form of yoga, and it could be a form of meditation, a form of mindful movement, depending on how it's practiced. If it's practiced with attention to the actions, the movements, the asanas, combined with attention to the breathing and integrating the inhales and the exhales with the movements while paying attention to sensations in the body, that's one way that it becomes a moving meditation or mindful movement. And for me, again, in my experience, this was the piece that really got me into meditation and that allowed meditation to be a big life-changing practice for me and getting me to my relief and recovery from my situation with chronic stress and burnout. So if it speaks to you, look into it. It can have such a big impact, such a big positive impact. Okay, and then the last strategy for completing the stress response cycle that I wanted to share about today is time in nature. The Nagoski sisters didn't bring this one up in the book, but this one is one that really, really works for me in a really powerful way. So I wanted to include it here. We could also call it, or you could also find it as nature exposure, nature therapy, ecotherapy, or forest bathing. Those are all kind of really official forms of it, but it can just be as simple as spending time in nature. And so I did some reading up and some research on this, and I found a couple of great resources, and I'll put links in the show notes. But I read from an article from Yale and also a research study in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. So again, I'll link those in the show notes. But what I found is that studies have shown that it's so good for your nervous system and your overall health. And that's because it lowers blood pressure, reduces stress hormones, brings down anxiety and even aggression, and calms the nervous system, brings down nervous system arousal. It also improves immune system function, mood, and even self-esteem. And it can be as simple as a hike in the forest or a walk at the park. Those are great ways, but it can be even more simple than that. It can be just sitting under a tree or admiring whatever nature you can find in your neighborhood if you don't have time to go, find a park or a forest or have access to those. And then there's even research showing that viewing nature indoors has benefits. And that could be viewing real indoor plants or looking at greenery out a window or looking at photos or watching nature videos. So that's 10 different strategies, 10 different ideas for how you can start completing your stress response cycle. And I really hope that at least a couple of those speak to you and you're starting to think about how you might bring them into your day or into your week. And then I want to acknowledge that we've been talking about the stress and how to start to recover from the stress, but we haven't talked about the stressors yet. So these are just first steps that you can take to begin dealing with the stress and start to recover. And that's going to get you into a better place for now, being ready to begin to deal with the stressors. And likely you're dealing with stressors as they come, right? And there's probably a variety of stressors. And chronic stress and burnout can be complex states. So dealing with the stress and the strategies we've talked about today are simple things to deal with. But as a whole, being in chronic stress and burnout can be a little more complex, and situations differ from person to person. So your situation is unique to you, and you'll need to identify the root causes for your situation. So those are going to be the stressors. And likely those stressors are going to come from a variety of places. There's stressors that are outside of your control, and there's some that are within your control. There's stressors that are external, and there's those that are internal. So I just want to acknowledge that those exist and that we didn't talk about those today, but those are very real, and they are things that you're going to need to get to. But now that you are learning how to take care of your nervous system, you'll be in such a better place to deal with those. And I realize that those things might be things like on the external, outside of your control. They might be things like workplace structures, or maybe your caretaking and all of the demands of that. They might be policies at work that undermine work-life balance. For example, if you're asked to work on your breaks, or to work before work and after work, or the expectation to work during personal time, and doing all of this paid or unpaid, these are some things that can be adding to the burnout. Unreasonable workloads, having unclear expectations, just lack of clarity from supervisors, lack of support, lack of leadership, not enough resources, so many things. And then there's other things that are more within your control, things that are more internal. They might be things like communication skills, needing to up and improve your communication skills, or needing to adjust your boundaries, or not having the skills to advocate for yourself, or just lacking a sense of autonomy. So many things that come into play here. Or it could be things that are a little deeper. It could be things like perspective, your perspective on things, or paradigms that you have, or things that you're focusing on. Or it could be meaning, the meaning that you give to things. Oftentimes we assign meaning to things. We assign positive or negative meaning to things. But in reality, everything that happens is neutral. It doesn't have a positive meaning or a negative meaning. And we assign certain meanings to things based on the circumstances that are going on, or even based on what state we're in, how we're feeling. And then sometimes later we realize, oh, I assigned a different meaning to that than what it actually means. Sometimes later, after a little time passes, we're able to have a perspective change and see that the meaning really is different, or we can choose a new and better meaning. So just some examples of some stressors that are more internal or within our control. And none of these are to say that what you're going through and what you're experiencing is your fault. It's probably not your fault, very likely not your fault. But again, it's your responsibility because it's happening to you and no one else can do it for you. You're the one that needs to make the decisions for what actions you're going to take. And taking good care of your nervous system and getting it into the best state that it can be in is going to help and support you in dealing with the stressors, the causes of your chronic stress and burnout, whatever they are. And you can do this no matter how overwhelmed you are or how deep into burnout you're feeling. You can do this. I know you can. Other people have done it. I've done it, and you can do it too. And it's just so good that you're here listening to this and getting this information. This is what's going to make it possible. So just keep going, keep taking action step by step, each day, one day at a time. It can be done. And then I want to acknowledge just a couple of elephants that might be left in the room. And I'll do that really quick, and then we'll wrap up the conversation today. So I want to acknowledge that this is something that's difficult, or it might be difficult for you. And so I just want to acknowledge that. What I've shared today, all about completing the stress response cycle, is simple. There's simple things to do, those 10 strategies, but they're not necessarily easy. So simple is not always easy. It can be difficult because it means stopping what you're doing to deal with your stress and to deal with your body and to deal with your emotions. Dealing with the stress versus the stressor. It's not an easy thing to do. You have a habit of ignoring these things, very likely, which is a big reason why it's gotten so bad. But if you start to build the habit, it will get easier and easier, and you'll feel better and better. So just get started. The momentum that you gain from just getting started, just taking a few steps, even if you fall off and miss a day or 10 days, just resolve to start again. And then acknowledging too that yes, this is yet another thing to do. So it's one more thing that you're needing to add to an already very full plate, likely. And it will require you to delete something else so that you can make space for this. And that's going to require you to reprioritize a few things and to prioritize yourself, which might be another difficult thing to do. But it's a really big, important part of healing from the chronic stress and burnout is making yourself a priority. And even though it's difficult, it is critical. It's absolutely critical. We talked about it earlier, but the stress really is slowly killing you and it's deteriorating your quality of life. It's shortening your lifespan. So it's critical that you do start to deal with this and take good care of your nervous system. And you'll need to find the time. So some things you can do is to look at what unimportant things do you do that could be replaced with completing the stress response cycle. So there's probably at least a couple of them. So this might be things like TV shows, streaming, watching shows on Netflix or YouTube. And not to say that you shouldn't be doing any of that at all, but maybe you're spending an hour or two on these things. So could you cut it in half to carve out a little bit of time for completing the stress response cycle? Or even maybe if you're spending 30 or 60 minutes, cutting that in half and using at least a few minutes to deal with the stress response cycle. Scrolling on social media is another one. Responding to mobile notifications might be another one. So just looking at what unimportant things you do in your day that you could replace with these strategies. Another thing that you could do is to look at what non-urgent things you do that could be replaced with completing the stress response cycle. For example, responding to that email or that text now when it really could have waited, or responding to notifications now that could have waited, or allowing interruptions like people popping in or calling when really you could have not answered the call, or you could have said, let me get back to you, in 10 minutes or in an hour. Or it might be busying yourself with random to-dos just because it feels good to check them off. I'm totally guilty of this one as well. I love making the list and then checking the things off. It gives such a sense of accomplishment. But just some ideas for what non-urgent things you're doing that you could replace with caring for your nervous system. And to wrap up the conversation, starting to think about your next steps. So, what next steps are you going to take based on the conversation today? I have 5 steps that I suggest that you do. So the first one, obviously, is to decide which strategies speak to you. Which strategies are you going to use, either from the 10 today or others that you're thinking about? And then step 2, get ready. So prepare and make a plan. Maybe you need to gather some equipment or some supplies. Maybe you need to make some arrangements, have some conversations with people in your life so that it's possible. And then schedule it. Actually add it to your calendar, to your schedule. Third is to actually do it and execute and follow through on your plan. 4, make adjustments as needed. And then lastly, 5, make sure to track your progress and reflect. This can really help to anchor it in, and to support you with that, again, check out my free guide. It's got a summary of the key points. It's got a checklist of all the strategies that we talked about today, and it also has a habit tracker that will help you track your progress if you're up for using one of those. You can use the one that I shared in my guide, or you could even just use a calendar or a notebook or an app, or you could create your own. And if you're not into habit trackers, that's fine, but find at least some way to record your progress. Sometimes days fly by before we realize we missed a day or a week or even a month or more. Tracking it just helps keep us honest and keep us on track. And if every day feels too overwhelming at the moment for completing the stress response cycle, just start somewhere. Just start where you are. And each time you complete the stress response cycle, notice how you feel and use that as momentum to build up to a frequency that works for you. Keep going and don't give up no matter how many days you miss or no matter how it goes. Every action you take and every step you take is a step forward, and all of it counts. And again, great job for being here. Thank you so much for listening to all of this if you made it this far. I can't wait to see how this goes for you and whatever you're going to use this for. If it's for recovering from overwhelm and burnout, or if it's for just dealing with general stress, or just caring for your nervous system and making sure that it's in top shape and can take care of you. And these are some of my very favorite things to share with others, and I just have seen how helpful they can be. So if you do give some of these things a try, let me know how it goes. I'd love to hear how it goes. Reach out, keep in touch, and let me know. And so thank you again for being here. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful. And if you did enjoy today's episode, make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss an episode, and leave a review. This helps us reach more listeners who need this information. And then just another reminder too about the freebies that I have, the resources that I'm sharing with you. So there's the guide. It's called The Fastest Way to Recover from Stress and Burnout, that goes with this episode. And it summarizes the key points we talked about, has a checklist of those strategies, and a habit tracker as well. That's at melissamwheeler.com/recoverfast. And then there's that 12-minute slow, deep breathing meditation that covers 2 strategies in one: slow, deep breathing and meditation. And you can find that for streaming and for download at melissamwheeler.com/meditation. I also have more offerings and episode show notes on my website, melissamwheeler.com. Some other offerings I have are, I have a private Facebook group where I go live each week with a guided meditation, and I'd love to have you join if you're interested in that. And I also have options for one-on-one support and coaching with me, and I'd love to work with you in that way. So you can check that out at melissamwheeler.com. And then lastly, follow me on Instagram. I'm at Melissa M. Wheeler, MMW, for behind the scenes content and updates. I'd love to hear from you there. And then make sure to check out the next episode, which is going to be all about the most critical and essential self-care practices to do if you want to further support your nervous system in finding relief from chronic stress and burnout. It's a great conversation. I can't wait to share it with you there, and I can't wait to connect with you again next time.